Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Laurel Path Lessons. I am Landgraffin Hunrvogt. We are taping actually two videos tonight around a related subject. One of them is on doing literature reviews. And if you have seen that one first, you'll see that I forgot to give my introduction incompleteness at the beginning, but we'll hit it here where I actually tell you what my name is. The other one is actually this video. For me, this is probably the starting, excuse me, this is probably the starting place. But this is what to do with all the information you find when you go out and you do a literature review or you fall down a rabbit hole and you're so excited because you are engrossed in your geekery. And then later you realize you can't find that information again. So early on, my geek, what I get excited about is horses. Actually, what my husband would tell you is my addiction is horses. But so I really like within the SCA going through and doing horse research because they were everywhere, which means I have no focus and I cover everything and I go down all the rabbit holes and I have these amazing friends that send me links and references and I have this unbelievable amount of information. And would you believe there is not a convenient government funded search engine that covers all the horsemanship information I want to know? So I can't just go someplace like pubmed.gov and find the info when I want to find it again. So what I'm going to go through in this video is I'm going to cover sort of how I've started tucking the information away. One of the most important things I learned in my professional education is before you start looking for data, what you want to be able to do is make sure you know how you're going to organize that data and keep it and being able to refer back to it and being able to reference it again, because you don't have to remember everything. You just have to remember where to find it. With that, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen and we will dig through my years of looking at stuff. So this is specifically, so I keep my stuff on the cloud. I travel a lot and I like to be able to give people answers even when I'm not near my computer and I don't travel with a laptop. So I keep most of my stuff on the cloud. This one specifically is for all of my horse research and everything related to that. So we're going to go through a lot of the things that are in here. And I'll kind of go through where I started. I had a friend so my SCA career, when I first started doing some horse stuff, people were like, well, hey, Elsa, you've got some experience with driving. Can you go ahead and talk about vehicles? So I built a handout. I put it together. I posted on some Yahoo groups. I shared it out a few places. I think I've got an old copy of the handout somewhere. I didn't label the photos terribly well. So I've got them. They're kind of labeled in the handout and they're buried in my computer somewhere, but I can't find them again. That was actually a good reminder to go back on some of the better training that I had to actually start putting this stuff in a place that's useful. So I have a science brain and science training. So what I actually do, pardon the scrolling, actually. Okay, here we go. What I actually do is I have a lab notebook. I don't have a website at this point. But what I do is I do keep track of all of my stuff. And I've gone through and I do it in a Google Doc. It's all cross-referenced. This, for example, is one of my ongoing projects. So Moose is, I think I'm 13 years. Well, let's see, May 2011. So I'm 12 years into owning him. I've always said he's my 20-year project. So we've probably got a few more years to go. What I do as I'm writing this is I go through, and this is really written for me and my knowledge. So I actually go through and write out what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking and that sort of thing to be able to keep track of the things. I have also gone through where I've got period quotes. I've been able to tuck them back in and find that information. So I want to show you a couple different ways that I use this particular document. That's an example of one of my ongoing projects. I also have some things that I've done where I've got questions that come into play. Let me look at driving. So I talked about, this is where I write things down. This is not a static document. Stuff will actually go through and change in here. So if I I have some questions about what do drivers do and some evidence on what I've been able to find. There are a few examples where I've been able to go through and find more information. For example, when I first started looking at period vehicles, I thought they didn't use blinkers or winkers, which are coverings that go up near the horse's eye to keep them focused forward. I actually really thought that was a Victorian thing, and the person I've done some research with, who's more experienced than I, she had the same opinion. We actually started looking into it, and we found some frescoes that had it. We went ahead and we reached out to the museum. They were able to date back to us and let us know that they had been restored. I was like, okay, well, I'm seeing them there. Maybe somebody in the Victorian area came through and fixed that. What the museum is telling us is that, yes, they've been restored, but nothing has been changed in terms of the original structure. So that's pretty good. And, here I've actually been able to find a quote that talks about using winkers. So this is on a ridden horse, not a driven horse. And we actually did go through and we found another additional image. And actually, this is a little old. I've probably got 3 or 4 images at this point that are definitely blinkers. And, I was going to show you blinkers on that pony, but she's not wearing any. So that kind of gives you guys an idea of how I use this for tracking my own information. What I'm going to go through, and let me go back up to the top, try not to get seasick. What I want to go through is talk about the other things. So these are my ongoing projects that I track. I have several events that I've done that have a fair amount of research tacked into them. I've got some events that I'd like to run sometime in the future where I've got a little bit of data, but I haven't really done much with it. I've got some of my mundane stuff on here. And I've actually got classes and things that I've put together in place. So links to some of my other projects and things in place. So I've got this all in one place. If I go down to the second page, these are my appendices, right? So go back to my Google Drive for a moment. All of this stuff that's in here, and I know what it is, but nobody else does, that's really what comes back in here. It also includes some items that are, for example, during the pandemic, we were all doing online displays. So this is a link to one of the online displays that I've put together. So I've got one handy place that I can go back and find all my resources. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes the answer for where you put stuff is you build it straight into a class or a presentation so you can find it again later. If I want, I also have, as long as we're talking about vehicles and that sort of thing, I actually have a Facebook group that I have a couple other co-researchers and we work together. And we have albums in here where we've gone through. Some people will use Pinterest, do the same thing. We have albums in here where we have gone through and been able to, as we find things, put them in. And here's the important thing. Make sure that we've labeled well where they're from, and so that people can find them and they become useful and they're out there for folks to use. So that's one way that we will go through and organize. What I like about this particular method, because there is a small community of us doing this research, and I do have friends that send us stuff. For example, one of my proteges has been traveling to museums this week. So she sent me some lovely images, which I was able to go through and, came to me, went up on her wall. I made sure I downloaded everything. I tucked them into an album here. And so I've got them here if I need them for a later project and I know where to find them. So that's one way that I will squirrel away and pack rat information. So what do I do with it from there? Well, sometimes I do things like building a class. So this is a course that I taught on using art to discover medieval driving practices. And within it, I was able to take a lot of that information that's tucked away different places in that Facebook group, and then go through and talk about some of the things we see and why they might be important and how they might tie back into vehicles and how they were used. So that's one set of research and things that I'll look at. If that's one piece, let me go ahead and pull go back to that example of moose, right? So we were looking at my horse here. And this is his little entry in my lab notebook. One of the things that's tucked through here are quotes that came from people. Because whenever you're working straight from art, maybe you're dealing with artist perspective, hard to say. We're really lucky in writing that they left behind for Europe starting the 15th century mostly, but heavily into the 16th century and a little bit earlier than that in the Middle East. The people wrote these amazing guides. And so one other organizational tool that I personally have used is my documentation project. So this is a spreadsheet. So that quote that I was just showing on Moose's page comes from a book that was written by Blundell. And actually what it is a period translation of a Italian source that went all over Europe and was translated into 5 different languages and that sort of thing. So I do have that period translation. And there's a bunch of things that have been important to kind of universal truths as I go through and read these books. And I'll go ahead and I'll take the time to type them in. Where I have an online source for a given reference, I paste that into here. Most of those are further out. And if I have somebody send me a source that I don't have time to look at, a lot of times I'll just stick the information up high. I'll stick the link right there. I can go back and find the quotes later. That's always doable. I personally have taken my universal truth quotes and I've split them into things that are important. Like a lot of times I get a question about, is writing an art? Is it a pastime? That sort of thing. So I've got a number of quotes from various period masters where they're discussing writing as an art. One of my personal interests, because I'm very interested in how you ride the horse, is the descriptions of what position people should be. Should the legs be exaggerated and forward like they are in some of the images? Or is it something where the folks would be, here we go, that we really want somebody to be centered and holding themselves in place? And does the description of the period authors match the modern things I'm looking for? By having these quotes and having them in a place I can find them, it gives me an easy way to go back and share that knowledge with people as I need it. It also gives me a place if I'm starting to do something like, say, teach a class on how they sat on horses in 15th century Portugal. I know I have the same book translated by 2 different people, and sometimes the translations vary. But I can go through and I can just skim these 2 things to give me a starting place. I have the books. I can go back to them and read the whole thing if I need to, but this gives me a quick starting place. So that's certainly one way I can use a spreadsheet to help keep track of information. Another place that I will come back to, this is actually a project that I started about a year ago. I had some folks asking some questions about what kind of words did they use and how do you track it down? And, I have that Blundell piece. And so one of my favorite things, I remember learning about this in high school. I was very excited to learn that the Oxford English Dictionary exists. And what it gives you is it gives you a word and all of the paths that it took and where it started and where you could first find it. So with that, I've got a subscription to the OED online. And periodically I'll go through and I'll look at things. So like age is a word that has some meaning in modern horse usage. It wasn't used originally until 1829, so it's not useful. Aged is another thing. That gets me back into the 18th century, but not as early as I would like. So within all this, I've been able to go through and tease out some of the words that they have. And going back to our vehicle reference, for example, we've got the names of parts of vehicles and descriptions of what they are and quotes of where they come from. So this gives me a few more quotes that I can go ahead and add to that knowledge base. For this particular one, I can sort by year. This is why I like spreadsheets. So I can go back and see what are some of the earliest words we have in place. I've also gone through, just like I did with the other quotes, I've kind of assigned them into separate categories. And so if I want to do things like, well, what kinds of activities did they do with horses? here's the names, and these are some of the words that they use to describe the types of activities that they did with horses. And so that gives me a way to be able to sort that knowledge without having to keep it all straight in my head. And so I talked a little bit about, I occasionally do events that are research and have information behind it. I've gotten in the habit when I do those, a lot of times of going ahead and building a website for that particular event. And I will keep that research and that resources information in there. This was for an event that unfortunately got canceled 3 times. But what it is it was going to be about travel and how people got places. And so we've got simple things like we were focusing in on a specific time period, looking into the mid 14th through the mid 15th century. So looking at some of the resources that would have been around to describe travel in that time period, and pairing it with art and examples of things. Here's an example of somebody mounting a horse. And so as a writer, this is useful information for me. Having it up on a website means it's potentially useful information for other people as well to be able to go through and find things. And for anyone that wanted to come to the event, we'd already had some of the research done and put it out there in a way that they could access. So that gets us back into actually another way. You talked about pulling classes. I talked about pulling classes together. Some of the other things that go through is we start to do more and more videos online like this one. Being able to capture that information and putting that information into a video is actually a way that I would sometimes store some information. I was just recently going back and looking at a video that I taped a couple of years ago because I'm like, hey, I remember doing that project. I've got this slide presentation for it, but I don't remember everything I said exactly. So I went back and I watched the video and I reviewed what I had to say, and I was able to compare that versus what my thoughts are now as I've had a chance to look through the information a little bit more and learn a bit more to it. So what do I do for the stuff that doesn't fit into, say, a slide presentation or a class, or I don't have a spreadsheet for it yet, but I still need to capture that information? Sometimes it's as simple as going through and starting a Google Doc. So what this is this is a historic account of a 16th century German who explored Venezuela. And I'm currently putting together a class on horses in the New World. So I was really excited to hear about this. I do not read medieval German, but through the magic of the internet, I was able to reach out and got some assistance from a SCA member in Drachenwald. And she was kind enough to go through, Grafman Cornelia was kind enough to go through and give it a skim and tell me what kind of details she was picking up on that. So here I've got the start of this document. This will start to become a class. And as it becomes a class, it'll feed in other places. And eventually, in probably my ongoing project section, there'll be a tab in here for horses in the New World as I start to pull more data together and tuck it away and pull I don't like just going down rabbit holes. I want to bring them with me. But that's kind of my overview on how I organize stuff. And I want to thank you all for joining me and just remind you that there is, if you have don't even know where to start on going down rabbit holes, I just want to remind you that there's the companion video that talks about lit reviews, which is sort of a start on how to venture down rabbit holes yourself. So thank you much. And I hope this helps you, and have a great time with your geek and have a great time compiling that information away. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.